An old, ragged man carrying a heavy sack shuffled through the doors of the Chase Bank branch in Rockview, a quiet little town that had seen little excitement for years. It was a calm, uneventful afternoon, the kind of day when the streets were empty, the sun hung lazily in the sky, and the hum of daily life continued in its predictable pattern. But all that changed the moment the old man walked through those doors. The heavy doors creaked open, their hinges squeaking under the weight of the man's presence. With each step, the room seemed to hold its breath, as though it had forgotten how to move. The old man's face was partially obscured by the wide brim of a well-worn cap. His clothes were tattered and weathered, a faded green sleeveless shirt clinging to his frail body, and his face, lined with deep wrinkles, told a story of hardship and time. Over his shoulder he carried a large burlap sack, its fabric torn and stained by years of use. The few customers in the lobby didn't even look up. They were too accustomed to the quiet routine of the bank. The employees behind the shiny counters exchanged polite smiles, their expressions a blend of mild interest and indifference. In their eyes, the old man was nothing more than a fixture, a forgotten soul who might ask for a few coins or some help, but certainly not someone who would make an impression in a place like this. However, as he walked further into the room, something shifted. The air, once still and unmoving, seemed to stir. The man's steps were deliberate, each one more sure than the last, as though he had walked this path before, and this time it was for something far more important than any of the others. When he reached the center of the room, he paused and raised his head, his eyes locked with those of the employees standing behind the counter. There was something in those eyes, something fierce, yet calm. They seemed to carry the weight of years, maybe decades. But beyond that, they radiated a quiet strength, as if this old man, despite his fragile body, wasn't someone to be overlooked. "I own this bank," he said calmly, but his words rang out with the certainty of someone who had made a declaration long ago, who had fought for what was his, and was now standing at the precipice of taking it all back. For a moment there was complete silence. The employees exchanged puzzled glances, unsure if they had heard him correctly. Then the laughter began. At first soft chuckles, then full-blown laughter. Some of the employees smirked, others openly grinned, and a few even shook their heads in disbelief. The security guard, a big man with a name tag that read Stephen, let out a short, dismissive laugh. He stepped forward, his hands folded in front of him, ready to escort the man out. One of the clerks, a young woman, tried to hide her grin behind her hand, while another quickly turned away, clearly struggling to suppress her laughter. Even the branch manager, a middle-aged man in a neat gray suit, shook his head with a bemused smile. He had dealt with many strange requests in his years at the bank, but this one? This was something entirely new. But the old man did not flinch. He remained still, his back straight, his eyes unblinking, unwavering. The laughter continued to spread through the room like a ripple in water. But just as it reached its peak, something happened. A shift in the air, a sudden weight that everyone felt. The man didn't respond to the laughter. Instead, he reached up, adjusting the sack on his shoulder, and without a word, let it drop onto the marble floor with a heavy, deliberate thud. The sound echoed through the room, slicing through the laughter like a knife. Everyone froze. The air grew thick with silence. The marble floor seemed to absorb the sound, and the ripple of amusement stopped in its tracks. "I am not confused," the old man said, his voice still calm, but now infused with an authority that could not be ignored. "This bank is mine." For a few moments no one spoke. The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the punchline to follow, or for someone to step forward and laugh it off. But no one did. Instead, there was only an eerie quiet. The silence stretched out, as though the room itself was unsure of what to do next. The branch manager, Temp, sighed, perhaps in an attempt to regain control over the situation. He stepped forward, maintaining a polite distance, but also exuding a sense of professionalism. He had dealt with upset customers before, but this was something else entirely. Sir, Temp began, giving the old man a measured smile, one that was patient but also a bit condescending. I don't think that's possible. Are you sure you're in the right place? Maybe we should sit down and talk to someone to help you. The old man did not move. He stood there, eyes locked on Temp, his shoulders squared, his presence filling the space. For a brief moment, it seemed like he was considering the offer to sit down, but then, without warning, he shifted his weight, making the sack tremble slightly. I'm not confused, he repeated. His voice was steady, unwavering. I'm the owner of this bank. The manager's smile faltered for just a moment. He could tell that this was no ordinary old man, but he was still skeptical. How could this frail, weathered figure, standing before him, possibly be the owner of a bank? Do you have an account here? Temp asked, his tone turning more polite, more professional, as he tried to diffuse the situation with a smile. The old man didn't respond immediately. His gaze didn't leave Temp's. Slowly, the old man tilted his head slightly, as though pondering the question. Then his voice, low and clear, cut through the tension. Son, I built this bank. There was a brief pause before the first laugh broke out, this one from a young teller standing near the counter. But the laughter quickly died as Temp looked around the room, searching for the right words. The laughter that had filled the room began to subside, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that stretched on. No one knew exactly what to make of this strange, weathered man standing before them, claiming ownership of a place as reputable as Chase Bank. The security guard, Stephen, stood with his arms crossed, still unsure whether to laugh it off or take the situation seriously. He glanced at the manager, Temp, for guidance. Temp's face had lost its earlier amusement, and a look of concern had started to take its place. Sir, Stephen said, stepping forward, his voice now more authoritative than before, I think we need to have a word about what's in that sack. It's not safe for you to be making claims like that. The old man didn't flinch. He was unfazed by the security guard's presence, standing taller than ever, his back straight, his eyes steady. A slow, almost imperceptible smile spread across his face. It was the kind of smile that made the air around him grow heavier, the kind of smile that told everyone in the room that this man wasn't going anywhere. This was no joke. Without a word, he bent down, his fingers wrapping around the rough burlap sack. The moment he started to untie the string, the room seemed to hold its breath. The laughter had completely stopped. Everyone was watching him now, wondering what he would pull out. Was it a bag of old coins, a forgotten relic of some bygone era? Or maybe a tattered document that he believed could prove his story? The old man took his time, carefully opening the sack with deliberate motions, each movement drawing out the suspense. Then, with a gentle pull, he revealed what lay inside. What happened next was something none of them could have ever predicted. Bundles of banknotes, old and faded, poured out onto the marble floor in a cascade. The notes were wrapped tightly in paper bands and stamped with the original logo of Chase Bank. Logo designs that had not been used in over 50 years. The scent of age filled the room, mingling with the faint smell of dust and leather. The bank's employees, once laughing at the absurdity of the situation, now stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. They stared at the pile of money scattered before them, the reality of what they were witnessing beginning to settle over them. Some of the notes were yellowed with age, others were creased, but they were unmistakably real. And then, as if the shock wasn't enough, the old man reached deeper into the sack. He pulled out a dusty leather-bound ledger, its cover cracked from years of neglect. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. The weight of the book seemed to add more gravity to the situation. He held it up for everyone to see. This is proof, the old man said quietly. proof that I built this bank. Proof that I owned it long before your father even knew what a bank was." A silence so deep followed that it almost felt suffocating. It was as if time itself had stopped. The manager Temp could hardly process what he was seeing. He reached forward slowly, almost as if drawn by an invisible force, and gingerly took the ledger from the old man's hand. What is this?" he whispered, his voice shaky. His eyes scanned the pages, and for the first time, Temp looked uncertain. The old man gave a slow nod, as though confirming something Temp had not yet fully understood. "Proof," he repeated, his voice now more resolute. "This is proof that I built this bank and that I owned it before it was taken from me." The security guard, Stephen, stepped back, his earlier smugness gone, replaced by confusion. He had seen a lot of strange things in his career, but this was unlike anything he had ever dealt with. He watched Temp as the manager slowly flipped through the brittle pages, his hands trembling. "Impossible," Temp muttered under his breath, unable to hide the disbelief in his voice. "If this were real, then—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening as they landed on something that made his heart skip a beat: the signature. It was there, on one of the early pages. The name C.K. Kirby was written in bold, unmistakable ink. Temp's mind raced as he tried to piece together the puzzle. Could it be? Was this really the same C.K. Kirby, the original founder of the bank? A murmur ran through the room as employees began to whisper among themselves. The name C.K. Kirby wasn't just some distant memory. It was a name tied to the very foundation of Chase Bank, one that had been spoken about in hushed tones for years. The founder who had mysteriously disappeared from the bank's history. Some thought he had passed away. Others believed he had simply disappeared without a trace. But now here he was, standing in the middle of the bank he once built, holding the evidence of his ownership, the very thing that had been stolen from him. Temp's mind raced. "C.K. Kirby," he whispered, "but you're supposed to be dead." The old man nodded slowly. His eyes softened for a brief moment, and then he spoke, his voice quiet but filled with an unmistakable truth. "I was erased from history," he said, the words heavy with the weight of years of pain. "I built this bank with my own 2 hands, but I was betrayed. By my business partner, by the very people who were supposed to be my friends." A chill ran through the room as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. The man who had founded this institution, the man they had laughed at and dismissed as a confused wanderer, was now laying bare the truth for all to see. The very bank they worked in, the marble floors they stood on, the shiny counters they polished every day, were built on lies. Lies that had been hidden for decades. "The man who took it from me," the old man continued, his voice hardening. "His name was John Williams. We built this bank together, but greed changed everything." There was a sudden shift in the room as the employees began to understand the depth of what was happening. The young teller, who had laughed just moments ago, now stood rooted to the spot, her face pale as she realized the enormity of the claim. The manager, Temp, still couldn't fathom it. His mind tried to wrap around the idea that the old man standing in front of him was none other than the founder of the bank, a man who had disappeared without a trace so many years ago. Temp's voice trembled as he tried to process the words that were slowly becoming clear to him. You're saying that you built this bank, and someone took it from you?" The old man gave a slow, pained nod. "Yes," he said simply. "They stole it from me, and now I'm here to take it back." The room was eerily quiet. The reality of what had just been revealed was too much to ignore. The bank manager, once certain that this was just an old man lost in delusion, now stood frozen, his mind racing. The room was still, heavy with the weight of the revelation. It was as though time had slowed down. The employees, once entertained by the spectacle of the old man's arrival, now stood in stunned silence, their disbelief giving way to a growing sense of unease. No one had expected this. No one had anticipated that the man they had all dismissed so easily would be standing before them as the rightful owner of Chase Bank. Temp, the manager, still held the ledger in his hands, his fingers trembling as he turned the brittle pages, each one revealing more evidence of the story the old man had told. The name C.K. Kirby was there over and over again. The signatures matched. The dates lined up with the history of the bank, the very foundation of the building beneath their feet. But Temp couldn't fully comprehend it. His mind struggled to accept what was unfolding before him. He had spent years working in this bank, trusting its history, its legitimacy, its ownership. But now everything was in question. "Are these real?" Temp whispered, his voice barely audible. The old man nodded slowly, his face solemn. "I've spent my entire life trying to prove it. Now here I am, standing in front of you. These documents don't lie. These papers show that this bank was stolen from me." A quiet murmur spread through the room as the employees looked at each other, uncertainty in their eyes. The truth was now undeniable. The old man wasn't just a madman claiming ownership. He was the rightful owner of the bank, the man who had built it from the ground up. And yet, here he stood, forgotten, erased, cast aside for decades. Temp swallowed hard, his mind spinning. But how is this possible? How could this have happened? The old man's face hardened as he spoke. "My business partner, John Williams, betrayed me. We built this bank together, and then one day he changed the papers, convinced the board that I was unfit to run things. Just like that, they erased me. My name, my legacy, gone." There was a collective gasp from the employees, and Stephen, the security guard, shifted uncomfortably. The truth was sinking in, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. The man who had been discarded as a relic of the past, the man they had laughed at, was now standing before them as the true owner of the bank. "But you were erased. Everyone thought you were dead," Temp said, his voice cracking. He couldn't fathom it. He had heard the stories, the rumors about the mysterious founder of the bank. He never imagined that the man would walk back into the bank alive and well, demanding what was rightfully his. The old man's eyes shone with something more than just anger. There was a deep sadness there, too, a sadness that had taken root in his heart over the years. "They wanted me to disappear," he said quietly. "They took everything from me, and they thought I would just fade away, but I didn't. I waited." His voice became stronger as he spoke, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone in the room. "I fought to get it back for years. I fought, but doors kept closing. People kept turning away. And then I disappeared. That's what they wanted. They wanted me gone." Temp looked at him, his mind racing. The man standing in front of him wasn't just the founder of the bank. He was a ghost, a victim of greed and betrayal. And now he had come back to reclaim what was his. "What happened?" Temp asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why did you disappear? What happened to you?" The old man's face darkened. "I was betrayed. I lost everything. I was forced out of the very place I built. And then I was forgotten." He paused for a moment, the weight of the years pressing down on him. "But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving until I take back what's mine." The silence in the room was deafening. The employees were no longer laughing. They were no longer amused by the strange old man with the sack. They were now facing the reality that they had been working in a building built on lies, a building whose true owner had just walked through the door. "Temp," Stephen said, his voice unsteady. "What do we do now?" Temp was still processing the magnitude of the situation. He turned to the old man, his mind racing with thoughts of the legal implications. The potential fallout, the years of history that could be unraveled in an instant. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. This is beyond anything I've ever dealt with. But the old man wasn't waiting for answers. He had waited too long, fought too hard. His eyes locked onto Temp's, his expression steady and resolute. "You need to make a decision," the old man said, his voice firm. "Either you continue to stand with the people who stole from me, or you help me reclaim what's mine." For the first time since the old man had walked into the bank, Temp felt a pang of uncertainty. He had always believed in the bank's history, in the legitimacy of its operations, but now faced with this undeniable proof, he was forced to confront a painful truth. The very institution he had worked for had been built on betrayal. He turned away, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He knew what he had to do. He had to help the old man, but doing so would mean tearing down everything he had known, everything he had believed about the bank. The employees looked on in silence as Temp stood there, lost in thought. The old man, C.K. Kirby, had come to reclaim what was rightfully his, and now the time had come for Temp to make a choice. The tension in the room was palpable as the realization of what was happening began to settle in. The once dismissed old man had become a force to be reckoned with. He wasn't just a ghost of the past. He was a living, breathing testament to the lies and betrayals that had shaped the very institution they had worked for. The truth had come to light, and now nothing would be the same. The silence in the bank grew unbearable, thick with the weight of history, guilt, and the overwhelming truth that had just been laid bare. The laughter from before had long since faded, replaced by an eerie calm that filled the room like a dense fog. Every eye was fixed on the old man, C.K. Kirby, standing with a quiet dignity that had silenced the once boisterous crowd. His frail body, once thought to be a symbol of weakness, now exuded a strength that no one had expected. He had come to reclaim what was rightfully his, and he would not be ignored any longer. Temp, the bank manager, still held the yellowed documents in his hands. His fingers trembled as he scanned the legal papers, the truth of the old man's claims becoming clearer with every line he read. He had spent his entire career working within the walls of this bank, trusting its history, its legitimacy. But now that history had been shattered, and in its place stood a man who had been erased from it. "Are these real?" Temp asked again, his voice almost shaking now. He had already asked the question once, but now it seemed more desperate, as if he was searching for some kind of explanation that could make sense of all this. The old man nodded, his eyes steady and unwavering. "These documents are real," he said simply. "They show that I never sold the bank, that I never gave it away. It was stolen from me, and I've spent my life trying to prove it." Temp lowered the papers and looked at the old man. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything that had been said, everything that had been revealed. The bank that he had worked for, that had been a part of his life for so long, was founded on lies. Lies that had been kept hidden for decades. The bank's rich history, the plaques on the walls, the framed certificates behind him, they had all been built on the back of a betrayal. And now, here was the man who had been wronged, standing in front of him with proof in hand. Temp's voice was barely above a whisper as he asked, "Why didn't you come back sooner? Why wait all these years?" The old man, C.K. Kirby, took a deep breath and stepped forward, the weight of his years pressing down on him. "I tried," he said quietly. "I fought for years to get it back, but every time I got close, the doors would close in my face. Every time I tried to make my case, I was shut out. People didn't want to hear it. They wanted me to disappear. And so I did. I vanished." He paused for a moment, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "But now I'm back, and I'm not going anywhere until I take back what's mine." The bank employees, who had once dismissed him as a confused old man, now stood in stunned silence. They had no words. The truth was right there in front of them, undeniable and irrefutable. The old man wasn't just an eccentric figure. He was the rightful owner of the bank. And now they had to reckon with the consequences of that truth. Temp took a deep breath and looked around the room. The employees, once skeptical, now seemed to share a common understanding. The laughter that had filled the air was gone, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of what had just transpired. "Where do we go from here?" Temp asked, his voice still shaky but firm. "What happens next?" C.K. Kirby's eyes softened for a moment, and then he spoke. His words measured but powerful. "I don't know what happens next, but I've waited a long time for this moment. I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to take back what was stolen from me, to make things right." The tension in the room was palpable. The weight of the decision Temp had to make was not lost on him. He could feel the eyes of every employee on him, waiting for him to take the next step. The old man had provided the proof. He had shown them the truth. And now it was time for Temp to decide what to do with it. There was a moment of silence, and then Temp made his decision. He turned to the employees, who were still standing in stunned silence. "We need to call the board. We need to call the lawyers. This is bigger than any of us." The room seemed to collectively exhale, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. But as Temp moved toward the phone, he stopped. He turned back to the old man, his gaze hardening. "But we need to be sure," Temp said, his voice steady. "We need to be sure that what you're saying is true." C.K. Kirby nodded once, a small knowing smile creeping across his face. "You'll see," he said softly. "The truth always comes to light, even if it takes time." Stephen, the security guard, who had been silent throughout most of this, took a step forward. His hand was no longer hovering near his belt, and he stood with a newfound respect for the old man. "I don't know if this is the right thing to do," Stephen said, his voice quieter than usual. "But I've been here long enough to know when something feels off. And right now, something doesn't feel off. It feels like the right thing is happening." Temp looked at him, his face a mixture of confusion and resolve. "I know what you mean," he said, "but we have to be careful. This isn't just a bank. This is everything, our jobs, our lives, all of it." But as the minutes passed, it became clear that Temp's initial hesitation was fading. The truth was undeniable. The old man had come back to claim what was rightfully his, and nothing would stop him now. The tension in the room grew even more palpable as the old man, C.K. Kirby, stood in front of them, calm and composed. He had fought for so long, and now it was all coming to a head. He had never given up. Even in the face of betrayal, even when the world had tried to erase him, he had held onto the truth. Temp stood at the phone, ready to make the call that would change everything. He wasn't sure what the consequences would be, but he knew one thing for sure. The bank would never be the same again. Just as Temp reached for the phone, the door to the back office opened, and the CEO of the bank, a tall, imposing figure, stepped into the room. He had been monitoring the situation from a distance, and now it was time for him to see the truth for himself. "Mr. Kirby," the CEO said, his voice cool and collected, "I think it's time we talked." The old man turned to face him, his eyes filled with the weight of years of struggle and loss. "It's time," he said simply, "and I'm not leaving until I get what's mine." With that, the CEO and C.K. Kirby moved toward the back office. The rest of the employees stood still, their eyes following them, wondering how this would all unfold. What would happen next? Would the truth be accepted, or would they try to cover it up once again? The story was far from over, but one thing was certain. C.K. Kirby had come to reclaim what was rightfully his, and nothing could stand in his way.